It's time to let your sports opinions fly for the main event. A 7-team elimination match to decide the District 4 3A Championship. Presented to you live by PilotPointBearcats.com. This 10-week match has been sanctioned by the University of Interscholastic League. Our celebrity referee for the District 4 3A show is none other than the daytime psychology professor, Texas high school football storyteller, North Texas insider, and DFW Inside High School Sports, the most feared member of the Texas high school mafia, the one, the only, small-town Dixie, the professor,
From our studios in Parker, Texas, beamed out by the mothership in Pilot Point, Texas, I am the Professor Matt Diggs, and it is week 9 of the District 4 3A report, always brought to you by PilotPointBearcats.com. Went over to PilotPointBearcats.com this week, and I feel like I was heard and validated as about 8 page downs. I got a lot of information at PilotPointBearcats.com if you're ever interested or needing information about the Pilot Point world. But there it was, my doppelganger, the professor, my much older professor version of me, but I like to consider it wisdom. The picture right there, the District 4 3A report, so thank you for validating my concerns, PilotPointBearcats.com, and getting me a link on your page. I know I feel it, and feel valued and respected because of your actions, our friends. But last week was the week, our main event. We talked about it. It was our lead story, and boy, did it live up to everything we could have ever wanted out of that game, and then some. Still some controversy. I don't know if everybody in Whitesboro has had or even wants to see the ending footage, the pictures that kind of give us the more definitive glance of what happened. But before we talk about what that means, if you didn't see the game or didn't go back and watch it on the WFAA channel, let's walk through what happened in Whitesboro versus Brock. And Whitesboro got started. We saw a couple of plays back and forth. We saw that Brock fumbled, and then Whitesboro fumbled, and then Brock finally got going. Brock started the scoring out with a 33-yard run by Reed Watkins. Nope, that's not the way we say that. Reed Watkins, 33 yards to make it 6-0. And at that point, because the 2-point conversion was no good, it kind of created its own little game within a game of teams chasing points and the different strategies that both coaches used in dealing with that. Whitesboro was stopped, and then Brock was stopped by an interception, and then Whitesboro finally got on the board late in the first quarter when Mac Harper had a 14-yard scramble, and then they took the lead 7-6. Moving to the second quarter, quite a bit happened in the second quarter. I mean, talk about the ending flurry. And you saw Reed Watkins run from 3 yards out, his second touchdown of the game. They got the 2-point conversion to catching up on points. And Brock led Whitesboro 14-7. After that, it was big play time, and Grayson Ledbetter busted a 58-yard run, and Mac Harper took it in for a 2-point conversion, and now Whitesboro is up 15-14 in the second quarter. Just quick plays, big play offense by both teams. Brock was able to have a pretty long drive where Tyler Moody found Carson Finney in the back of the end zone, but then they missed the 2-point conversion, and now Brock leads Whitesboro 20-15. Whitesboro couldn't get anything going on their next drive, ended up going 3 and out with a penalty. and Brock got the ball with pretty good field position after kind of a shanked punt. They got to start on the Whitesboro 38-yard line and 4 runs from Reed Watkins. They didn't even need to pass the ball. Well, they did pass the ball for the touchdown, but he got the first 3. Reed Watkins caught it and then caught the ball out of the backfield. And all of a sudden, Brock is taking a 27-15 lead to halftime. Whitesboro had one more chance to end the second quarter, and they stalled out. And then we went to halftime. Great halftime show, I hear. Wasn't there? Didn't watch the halftime shows on the WFAA. But Brock had the ball to get started in the third quarter. So you're thinking they're up 2 scores. This is a chance to kind of get their footing. Whitesboro's defense stepped up, big plays. Sterling Garten, kind of the MVP of the defense, was a big part of the second half. Whitesboro got things going, and Mac Harper had a 25-yard pass. I believe that was Brett Donaldson on the catch on that one. Yeah, Brett Donaldson, 25-yard reception, and now we're back to 27-22. Brock leading Whitesboro. Brock again couldn't get anything going on, and then again Grayson Ledbetter. The Grayson Ledbetter show, just a fantastic performance by him in just only 11 carries in the game, but he had 2 touchdowns, including 2 house calls, and all of a sudden, and Brock goes for 2 points at that point, but they didn't get the 2-point conversion at that point, and Whitesboro is now up on Brock 28-27. Brock, going to the fourth quarter, is down 28-27 on an extended drive, and to start out the fourth quarter, they threw an interception, kind of an arm punt at the end of the day there. They were down to the 17 and got stalled out in that drive. And now Whitesboro, again, third straight drive that they're putting up points, and you see Mac Harper finding his target from 29 yards out in Jace Sanders, and all of a sudden, 3 straight 21-0 run, and you got Whitesboro up on Brock 35-27 with 9 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Brock had a very long drive, 6 minutes in the fourth quarter, and Tyler Moody found Jet Jones in the back of the end zone for 17 yards. And now you need a 2-point conversion because we're playing the 2-point conversion game all game, and Whitesboro had been winning that game, and they missed the 2-point conversion, and now Whitesboro is up on Brock 35-33, which is a little over 3 minutes left in the game. Now, big kickoff. I saw it a couple of times on TV. I'm sure if I talked to them, I'd get a little bit more communication. Looked like perhaps he was the receiver was hoping that the ball would bounce out of bounds, or maybe try to catch it right there. And sometimes you'll see some players try to do that, because if you catch the ball out of bounds and that you technically get it at the 30. It's a kind of a weird rule as far as that goes, but I've seen some players try to do that. Don't know what happened, but it ended up, it almost looked like he kind of tripped over his own feet, and the Whitesboro kickoff returner, and the ball had a weird bounce, and all of a sudden Brock recovers the ball after the wonky butt bounce, and they've got the ball, and that was the big turnover that Whitesboro needed to get going. And then Tyler Moody found Cam Harris to go up 39-35 with 2.5 minutes left in the game. So Whitesboro kicks off, big kickoff return, and Whitesboro is in business. Basically 2.5 minutes to drive down, and as the controversy continued in this game on the very last play, and Whitesboro had to convert several fourth down plays as part of this drive, including an incredible kind of a against the grain throwback, just a beautiful play call. I talked about some of the gadget plays that would be needed in this game with Whitesboro and Brock, and obviously both teams brought out their A game. And then the last play of the game, Mac Harper ends up scrambling, gets flushed out of the pocket, He's about the 7 yard line. And I'm watching this game live after my game on Friday night. It's like 10:40 at this point. You had TV timeouts, and this was the main event. And I thought Mac Harper was going to be dead to rights at about the 7 yard line, and he just broke a couple of Brock player ankles and had one more incredible cut, dove to the goal line, and ended up just a couple of inches short. On the YouTube, the WFA coverage, it sure looked like a touchdown. But again, as Mike Leslie said, and I get it, it's all about the angles. And the angle, you had the field judge who was right there on top of it, and they made a good point of saying it sure looked like a touchdown, but the down the line or from behind the end zone was going to be the definitive look. And of course, a couple of photographers did take the pictures of that, and you could clearly see Mac Harper's elbow down with the ball in his hand, just inches. I mean, you could just see enough green before the white line to know that he had not made it in, but it's about as close as you can get. And that led to Whitesboro losing to Brock 39-35. Looking at the stats, again, all of the big players showed up as needed. Mac Harper, 15 for 30, 225 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Rushed the ball 8 times. Only had 3 official yards according to the Max Prep stats. I'm sure there's some sacks factored into that. Grayson Ledbetter, 11 carries for 139 yards, 2 touchdowns. We talked about the 2 house calls that he made. And then receiving, Brett Donaldson and Jay Sanders were the main targets. Clay Hermes, 4 receptions for 33 yards, and Carter Sluter, 3 for 61. But Brett Donaldson and Jay Sanders caught both of those touchdowns for Whitesboro. For Brock, Tyler Moody, 4 touchdowns on the game, 16 for 25, 175 yards. Also did have 2 interceptions. Reed Watkins, 16 carries for 105 yards. And 2 touchdowns. Brett Tutter, 10 carries for 44 yards. Tyler Moody running the ball is also a good factor for Brock. 11 carries, 63 yards. Very evenly matched game. Just looking at this, looked like Whitesboro had about 375 yards, and Brock had about 385 yards. The digital stats, which I've had some people tell me they didn't think the stats were completely accurate. It had Whitesboro at 362 versus Brock at 370. Again, this is what we talked about ad nauseum last week with this game. It was going to come down to turnovers. Brock had 3 turnovers. Whitesboro had 2, but one of Whitesboro's 2 turnovers was that kickoff fumble late, and that was the big one that flipped the game over. And even with that, this was a game of 2 or 3 inches. That was the difference between Whitesboro and Brock. Just 2 fantastic teams playing fantastic football. On the receiving end, I didn't give my receiving stats for Brock. Carson Finney, 6 for 55 and a touchdown. Jet Jones, 4 for 46 and a touchdown. And then Reed Watkins, that drive at the end of the second quarter, that he had all 4 plays. 3 of them runs and 1 of them was pass. The pass 23 yards for a touchdown. So just an absolutely fantastic football game. I think if I asked Mike Leslie and Heckma Harrison, the broadcasters for that, it's their game of the year so far and one of the better games they've ever called. When you get Brock on prime time, it is something fantastic. The Brock versus Gunter game had that kind of intensity as well. So Brock 39, Whitesboro 35, and this is a game that we hope we can see one more time later on. And in fact, our lead story will be a little bit about whether or not that will be the case. Also this week, we had Ponder versus Boyd. Boyd defeated Ponder 49-42, and this was a game of back and forth. This is the first game I've missed in our District 4 3A district picks all year. I took Ponder in this one. I had Ponder by 2 scores, and it ended up Boyd by 1 score. And it was just, again, one of those back and forth games that you expect with Ponder. Every time Ponder is playing these games against the teams in the bottom tier of this district, I expect the first one to 50 to win. In fact, I set the over-under at this game at 90, and they got 91. Clifton Cooper, 32 for 51, 334 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. And the turnovers, again, were a major factor in this game as well. Clifton Cooper also rushed for 25 times for 119 yards and 3 touchdowns. So 4 touchdowns total for Clifton Cooper. Braden McIntyre probably had his best game as a Boyd Yellow Jacket, 19 for 34, 219 yards and 5 touchdowns. Carter McClure ran the ball 19 times for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Gavin Rosado, 26 runs for 104 yards. So, I mean, just talk about plays left and right. 81 plays uh, for Ponder and 83 plays for Boyd. It was high velocity, high action football. Receiving, Aiden LeMasters 8 catches for 68 yards and 3 touchdowns. Carter McClure had 2 receptions for 30 yards and a touchdown, and Gavin Rosado 1 reception for 37 yards and a touchdown. So Boyd had their best game when they needed it the most, and they're still alive for the playoffs after beating Ponder 49-42. Ponder is not officially eliminated, but at this point they're going to have a tiebreaker and some things go their way to make it to the playoffs. Finally, we had Paradise versus Peaster this week, and Paradise with a very dominant win over Peaster, 48-14. And this was a game where Peaster, it was kind of feast or famine. If they did not hit a big play, they were not driving down the field on Paradise's defense. Started out with Austin Iglesias with an 8-yard run to start off the scoring, and then a 75-yard pass from McElroy to Tremar Gilbert. The first of 2 big passes from McElroy to Gilbert, which pretty much represented all of their scoring on the game. Then Austin Iglesias answered back with a 2-yard run. Then Austin Hawley with a 16-yard pass from Iglesias to get going, or Landon Hawley, not Austin Hawley. Landon Hawley with the reception to get on the board. Now it's 21-6. And then Aiden Winters with a 40-yard reception from Iglesias right before the half. But then Peaster, another 50-yard bomb from McElroy to Tremar Gilbert to make it 28-14 at halftime, but Peaster would not score again. Paradise's defense just completely shut them down and stopped the big plays from happening. And then Iglesias with 2 more touchdown runs, and then a big Landon Hawley. How do I keep calling him Austin Hawley? There must be something in my head, maybe a wrestler or something. Crash Hawley, the Hawley family, who knows. Landon Hawley ended up with 3 receptions at 97 yards and 2 touchdowns, and that was the second of his 2 touchdowns of the game, and that ended up the scoring. 48-14, Paradise moves to 8-0 in this young season. That's not so young for many teams in the District 4 3A report, but it still feels young. For Brock, they're thinking we're only about halfway through. Paradise, they're going through the 8th. They only have 2 more games left, and those 2 games are pretty important as they will get to test their mettle with Brock and Whitesboro. Austin Iglesias, 6 for 13, 141 yards and 3 touchdowns. Quite a few runners. It looks like perhaps Paradise had some injuries in the running game because we saw some new runners this week in the stat sheet. Austin Iglesias, obviously the go-to, 16 carries, 79 yards and 4 touchdowns. So all 7 touchdowns he accounted for in the game. Hunter Sutton, a new name for me, 10 carries for 39 yards. Leo Hernandez, we saw him the last couple of weeks, 3 carries for 56 yards. And another new name, Isaiah Jennings, the go-to workhorse back for Paradise, 18 carries for 143 yards. Only a sophomore. Him and Gage going to be the players that we're going to be watching for the next couple of years. Then we talked about Aiden Winters, 1 for 40 and a touchdown. Landon Hawley, 3 for 97 and 2 touchdowns. Gunnar McElroy had a tough night, but he threw very efficiently, 12 for 27, 206 yards and 2 touchdowns. Running the ball, they just could not get any sort of offense flowing through the rush game. 5 carries for 12 yards for McElroy, 5 carries for 10 yards for Tremar Gilbert. So to Peaster's credit, they were able to get Gilbert out in the flats, and they were able to get some big chunk yardages there. Tremar Gilbert had 5 receptions for 133 yards, the longest of that being that 75-yard touchdown run and another 50-yard touchdown run, or 50-yard touchdown pass. Both of those were receptions for the big chunk of their yardage. Other than those 2 plays, We're talking about a Paradise team that shut Peaster down, only about 100 total yards in the other 30 plays that Peaster was able to run. So Paradise with a dominant 48-14 victory, and everything is kind of coming into focus now in our District 4 3A report as far as the standings go. Paradise is in, even if they lost out to Brock and Whitesboro. They have clinched the playoff spot. Brock, Whitesboro cannot say they've clinched the playoff spot quite yet, although Brock can do that if it can go to 4-0 this week against Paradise. And then Whitesboro with the week off obviously cannot clinch this week. However, I guess they can technically clinch if Pilot Point loses to Boyd, as Whitesboro would win all the tiebreakers involved in that, even if they ended up getting upset by a team at the bottom half of the district. Then Pilot Point will be playing Boyd this week, and Ponder will be playing Peaster this week. So we've got 3 just absolute banger games that we'll talk about on the other side of our lead story this week that could really impact the way that this district goes. It's one of those pick'em weeks that it could go either way. I could end up going 1-2 just as easily as I could end up going 3-0, depending on how the lower tier teams play the upper tier teams and how the matchups end up and how the turnovers end up. But our lead story this week, I think, is a very important story that our friends in Whitesboro, Paradise, and Brock really need to think about, and that is the Bushland Falcons. And the Bushland Falcons have been playing lights out football, and I feel like we need to take a little bit of a deep dive on Bushland because this is going to be a team that the way things are kind of shaping out, and we'll kind of talk about how the brackets work over the next couple of weeks, that the District 4 3A report will have 3 cracks to knock them out, and we'll find out if any of the teams in the District 4 3A report can knock out Bushland or if they are just that good. Quite a divergent view of Bushland depending on which of the power polls you listen to. So we'll talk a couple of the power polls and try to calibrate this as best we can. Just some of the basic information about them. Their coach is Josh Reynolds, and this is his 3rd year. And Josh Reynolds is very familiar with the District 4 3A report. In fact, in the last 3 years, they've played Brock every single year in those last 3 years. Brock is 3-0 against them, beating them in non-district 31-3 last year. 2 years ago, they beat Bushland 55-7, and 3 years ago, Brock beat Bushland 20-17. 2 of the last 3 years, we saw Whitesboro play Bushland in the playoffs. Last year, Whitesboro was fortunate enough to get a 41-21 win over Bushland, but 3 years ago, in Coach Reynolds' first year, Bushland had an impressive 34-10 victory against Whitesboro. So these are programs that they're all familiar with each other because of the way that things have been bracketed out. 5 games of District 4 3A opponents against Bushland over the last 3 years in Coach Reynolds' 3-year reign over there at Bushland. A couple of the players that you're going to keep an eye on for Bushland, and if we have anybody from Bushland listening to this, I apologize. I'm not going to have a super deep dive. Y'all don't really have great information. I've had to kind of piecemeal some things through Twitter. You don't put everything on Max Preps. But I do know your quarterback is Dawson Jaco. He's been averaging about 250 yards a game. Really shows kind of the dual threat and hybrid nature of the Bushland attack. They're not just simply a run team, and they're not simply a pass team. They're very balanced, and they have big play makers on both of the running and the passing game. And Dawson Jaco has really led this team very well, throwing the ball at 250 yards. And more importantly, he doesn't have many turnovers. And I think that's something that Whitesboro and Brock fans have to kind of take to heart, especially Brock, who has 15 turnovers in their first 7 games. Their running back, Ivan Soto, has had an average of about 220 all-purpose yards a game, constantly getting 200 yards a game on the ground. And at wide receiver, there are a lot of threats. Baylor King, a two-way stud for Bushland, is a huge threat, a huge possession threat. Brecken Reed can play tight end. He can also go wide out. Cole Purcell and Tate Butcher also wide receivers of note for the Bushland Falcons. Matthew Bridges is an absolute stud playing linebacker for Bushland. He is a game changer, over 5 sacks this year, and that was just a stat I saw a couple of games ago. Who knows how many he got in the last couple of games? Might be closer to 8 or 9 sacks. And then Baylor King has at least 2 interceptions for them, playing both ways. So Bushland is a team that obviously is very, very good this year. And if you talk to some of the Bushland faithful, some of the Bushland commentators and people who keep an eye on Panhandle football, they will tell you that this Bushland team just looks a little bit different than other Bushland teams, getting back to more of the 2019, 2018 versions of Bushland that were much more successful. So let's kind of look at their schedule and what they've done this year, because one thing that I've kind of noticed in covering the District 4 3A report is that when you have two widely divergent regions that don't play each other, very often you can find that it's just the computer polls are off, because if they start with a bad calibration to get going, then the calibrations stay bad. And I think we kind of saw that a little bit last year. A lot of people thought that Whitesboro was going to be an underdog, significantly so, but they had a very dominant run getting to the fourth round of the playoffs before they lost to Brock again. And I think we saw that with that calibration, that when you looked at their path, starting out with Breckenridge and then Bushland, the computer polls had them underdogs in several of those games, but they won those games convincingly. So you never know how the calibration will work. Maybe Bushland is underrated, maybe Bushland is overrated, because we have no true connection between the teams playing up there and any Dallas area teams who have played. You just don't have any of those games where you can kind of connect the dots. They started out their season with Canyon West Plains, and they beat them 52-6. West Plains was a 4A Division II team. And then I think what everybody got Bushland on the radar was the way that they beat Canadian, a 3A Division II team, a team that is always there at the end of the year. I know a lot of people have kind of kept an eye on the Gunter versus Canadian rivalry over the last couple of years. Obviously, we have no games this year to kind of connect the dots, but they beat Canadian 47-21. This year, if you want to kind of view what's Canadian like, kind of think of Canadian like Bells. I don't think they're quite at the Gunter level, but it shows you that they beat a very, very good team by 4 scores. Then they played Childress, another 3A Division II team, beat them 43-0. 4A Division II Border, they beat 51-13. They beat 4A Division I Dumas 38-20, and then another 4A Division I, a team that could go make quite a run in 4A Division I because of the weaker region up there, El Paso Riverside. They beat them 56-14. Now we've moved into district, and they beat Muleshoe 34-0, and then they beat Amarillo River Road 68-0. So when you look at a couple of the ways that you can look at them, we'll look at the Pigskin Prep, which is the engine that runs Dave Campbell's picks. If you have a premium subscription, also, I just consider it Jerry Force rankings, which I have the opportunity to get to see every week. He has Bushland as currently an 11-point favorite over Brock, a 19-point favorite over Whitesboro, and a 23-point favorite over Paradise. But again, a lot of that has to do with the way they calibrate Canadian and the way they calibrate Dumas and some of the West Texas teams. And we saw that last year, that they were consistently off by a pretty good factor as far as that goes. So when you have them starting high, maybe a little bit too high, they're going to consistently stay high until the by district games start to kind of whittle the computer poll rankings back down to a more reasonable level, when we can start to calibrate districts 1 and 2 and districts 3 and 4 in region 1. Massey rankings is a publicly available rankings. I talked about Massey ratings last week as far as its formula being used as part of the college football playoff scenario for a little bit of a while, and it has a little bit of a different look with Bushland, Whitesboro, Brock, and Paradise. And I think it's also important to note that although I'm focusing on Whitesboro and Brock, Paradise is widely thought of as the 4th ranked team in this region by both Massey and Pigskin Prep. So for the best 16 teams that will be making it into the playoffs, it's going to be Bushland, Whitesboro, Brock, and Paradise. And that's going to be important because in the second round of the playoffs, our first look at Bushland will be a likely likely second round game against Paradise. So Bushland, if they are going to get to the state semifinals, they will likely have to knock off Paradise, Whitesboro, and Brock in that kind of succession, in that order. Whitesboro would be the third round game, and then Brock would be the fourth round game, assuming everybody takes care of business to get there. In the Massey rankings, the power rankings, Brock is ranked 174th in the state. Bushland is ranked 202nd in the state. Whitesboro is ranked 214th in the state, and Paradise is ranked 327th in the state. And to give you a little bit of a Brock-Bushland calibration there, even though Brock is ranked 174th in the state, Bushland is ranked 202nd, as I mentioned. Wichita Falls Hershey, the team that I thought was most like Whitesboro in that calibration, is ranked 201 currently. And there have been some forfeit wins that might be messing with that ranking a little bit, so I wouldn't put too much. But just to kind of give you just a quick view of where these teams fall, Brock, Whitesboro, Bushland are all very close rated by the Massey rankings. Looking at the you can run simulations on this. I think it's fascinating. You can run 5-game series, 3-game series, 1-game series, and every team has an offensive, defensive adjustments and a power ranking, and they kind of put that together in a hypothetical Bushland versus Paradise game. Currently, as of this week, Bushland has a 66% win probability over Paradise. Bushland versus Whitesboro, it's a coin flip game to Massey, 51% win probability. I was playing and refreshing it a couple of times, and there were a 5-game series that Bushland won all 5, and then there was a 5-game series where Whitesboro won all 5 of the games. So just a absolute coin flip. And then Bushland versus Brock, Bushland had a 46% win probability, so Brock is a slight favorite over Bushland at this point. So looking at Bushland, I think that's going to be the team that will be the Jim Ned, if you will, of this region. And I think that Bushland is a very good team. And again, I haven't seen all of the ranking. I haven't seen all of the statistics from every single game that Bushland has played, so this might be a little bit off. But what I've noticed on the games I could get a read on and was able to dig down, Bushland is not making turnovers. And when you look at that Whitesboro versus Brock game, there was 5 turnovers in that game, including a special teams play late and then interceptions on both sides of the ball. You're just not seeing that with Bushland. Bushland is playing clean football consistently, and I think that could be one of the differences between right now between Whitesboro, Brock, and Bushland, is that a lot of mistakes happening in Whitesboro, a lot of mistakes happening at Brock. They haven't played their best game, and even though it was a fantastic, entertaining football game, I don't think either coach is going to look at the tape and go, we played exceptionally well in that game. I think both of the coaches are going to look at that and say, we can get better. But Bushland is already playing at that level, which is surprising because they don't have a ton of players back. Dawson Jaco, as I mentioned, is a first-year quarterback. Ivan Soto returns, Matthew Bridges returns, Baylor King returns. So, I mean, they have some players back that contribute to that. But when your quarterback, and we're talking about with Brock and Whitesboro, both of them returned their quarterbacks. Their quarterbacks had significant experience last year. Dawson Jaco is playing fantastic for his first run, and I think that's going to be one of the factors to consider when we are considering Bushland and how they're going to fare. So can Whitesboro and Brock get over their mistakes, a lot of their self-inflicted wounds? I think that's what the next 3 to 4 weeks before these games start to really matter and we get into elimination football, that's what's going to have to get fixed before we're starting to play Thanksgiving football, which is what the hypothetical Bushland versus Whitesboro 3rd round, and then the winner of that playing Brock in the 4th round. And I think Brock has a pretty clear path to that 4th round game, but we know that Whitesboro is going to have a couple of challenges in getting there. So let's kind of look at the how things are looking in Region 1. District 1, looks like Denver City is going to end up as the first seed. This week we had Brownfield versus Kermit. The winner of that game will likely be the second seed. The loser will likely be the third seed. And then we have Slayton versus La Mesa this week. The winner of that game will likely have the fourth playoff spot wrapped up, and the loser of that game will not make the playoffs in the 5-team district. In 2-3A, that's where Bushland is. Bushland is pretty solid, number one. They still have Shallow Water this week, and that's going to be the big game for them. We'll have a chance to see how Bushland and Shallow Water calibrate, if maybe Shallow Water is a little bit better, or if Bushland is going to continue their reign of dominance. I have Shallow Water number 2, and then Muleshoe number 3, and then Dalhart number 4. It looks like Amarillo River Road will be the team left out in District 2-3A. Moving to 3-3A, there was a little bit of an upset last week. Breckenridge was state ranked, and then Vernon came to town, and Vernon knocked them off in a pretty impressive fashion. So as of right now, and this is just my rankings, and I've no official, why it is or whatnot. I think Jim Ned is going to find their way to the number 1 seed, Vernon number 2, and Breckenridge number 3, and then Clyde and Iowa Park will be playing next week for the 4th seed. And I think because the game is at Clyde, I have Clyde as a little bit of an advantage over Iowa Park right now. But you can absolutely see a situation that we saw last year that impacted Whitesboro, where you have Breckenridge, Jim Ned, and Vernon all beating each other and tying for the first playoff spot, which means that you're going to have basically one of the co-district champions at the 3rd seed, which is who Whitesboro at the 2nd seed will end up playing in the first round. If you remember last year, we had a Breckenridge Wall early, where all 3 of those teams beat each other, and then Whitesboro had to play Breckenridge, a team that you thought was pretty good since they had an early big win over. They had a big win early, and then Wall came in there and messed it up late. But Whitesboro had a 56-14 win over Breckenridge last year as part of that big run that they had to the regional finals. So will that happen this year, or will it be clean? If it's going to be clean, I think we'll find out pretty soon. Jim Ned plays Breckenridge this week, so if Jim Ned beats Breckenridge, I would take Jim Ned over Vernon right now. But we'll find out what actually happens. If Breckenridge beats Jim Ned, then you might see Vernon 1, Breckenridge 2, Jim Ned 3. And if that's the case, we'll see Jim Ned versus Whitesboro in the first round. But if it ends up in that jumbled mess where all 3 of them beat each other, you just don't know how it will end up. And then in 4-3A, obviously we've got Brock number 1, Whitesboro number 2, Paradise number 3, and I'm still hanging on to Pilot Point at number 4. But that could change this week, and we'll kind of dig into the game matchups this week. The first game is Paradise versus Brock. Just the way things, the matchups go. Paradise, they don't have much of a passing game. They like to run the ball. Brock, what do? They shut down the run. I think that Brock will probably have their way with Paradise and give them their first loss of the year. I think Paradise just not going to get a lot of offense flowing against Brock. I think Brock will win a 35-14 kind of game. Pilot Point versus Boyd, I think, is going to be a very good game, and it's going to come down to Wyatt Smith again. We saw that Clifton Cooper was able to have some big stats against Boyd, but the key is that Pilot Point has a pretty good defense, and I think that they can slow down Boyd, especially Boyd's running attack, and I think that their offense will be able to get going. I don't think it'll be a blowout by any means. I think Pilot Point will win a 28-21 kind of a ball control kind of a game against Boyd. And then Ponder versus Peaster, I think Peaster is finally going to start to pick things up. I think that with Ponder's lack of defense and Peaster's ability to have big plays with McElroy and Tremar Gilbert, I think they're going to have a big game against Ponder. I think Peaster will get their first win of district in a pretty convincing way. I think they'll win a 49-35 kind of game against Ponder. And when you play Ponder, you're playing by 7s. You're not playing by 3s. Although, if you remember, Pilot Point had 2 pretty big field goals in that game against maybe even 3 field goals. I think 49-58. So they probably had 3 field goals in that game that helped them against Ponder. So still you're generally playing by sevens as far as that goes, except for end of game situations and end of half situations. So Ponder versus Peaster will be a big game. The loser of this game will be officially out of the playoffs with 4 losses, although Ponder is going to have a hard time because they've already lost to Pilot Point and Boyd. They would have to beat one of the big teams still, and I just don't see that happening. So Peaster, this is Peaster's opportunity to get back, as their last 3 games of the year, they get Pilot Point, Ponder, and Boyd. So if they can run that table and beat Pilot Point, then they can get that 4th seed coming up. So that is how things are faring in the District 4 3A report. We learned a little bit about Bushland, learned a little bit about how the playoffs are settling. Looks like the first round projected games currently, I would have Jim Ned versus Pilot Point, Vernon versus Paradise, Breckenridge versus Whitesboro, and Brock versus Clyde. But 1 to 3 are very fluid and they can go either way. I think 1 to 3 in District 4 3A are pretty well set. And then the 4th seed, currently a Pilot Point, I think whoever that might end up being will have a pretty competitive time in the first round against either Jim Ned, Vernon, or Breckenridge, depending if it ends up clean or if it ends up being a 3-way tie and all kinds of chaos. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight into Region 1 and a little bit of insight into Bushland. Bushland's pretty good, folks, and I think that as fun as it is to imagine a Brock versus Whitesboro regional final rematch, and as much as we would love that in the Dallas area, Bushland is arguably playing better than both Whitesboro and Ponder, or Whitesboro are clearly playing better than Ponder. They're playing better than Whitesboro and Brock right now, and Whitesboro and Brock are going to have to clean up those turnovers and have to play a pretty clean game to beat Bushland this year, because Bushland is playing very complementary football, being able to run the ball, throw the ball, and having a really good defense that can make plays and stop drives from happening. And Brock's got that on the defensive side of the ball, and we saw a little bit about that from Whitesboro, but will they be able to do it consistently without their offense creating extra opportunities for Bushland's offense? That's what's going to have to get cleaned up. So wow, another District 4 3A report is down. So go ahead and start to get the music rolling out there in Pilot Point. I am your Professor Matt Diggs, and we will see you next week for the Week 10 episode of the District 4 3A report here at PilotPointBearcats.com.
I ain't leaving!